Hi, I'm Tim Swari.
And I'm Rachel.
First of all, we gotta present about history of pharmacy. The evolution of the profession of pharmacy can be divided into 5 historical periods.
Primarily, here's how the pharmacy begins in ancient era. Early man were used materials in his surroundings, leaves, mud, cool water to stop bleeding and heal wounds. Dry clay was used to splint. They used these methods by observing how animals heal their wounds. At some point, man began to document healing practices on clay tablets in 2600 BC. In Babylonia, the earliest record of the practice of pharmacy by the priest, pharmacist, and physician was kept. This is where the science of drugs, organized pharmacy and medicine had its beginnings. According to legend, stems from Shen Nung, emperor who sought out and investigated the medicinal value of several hundred herbs. He reputed to have tested many of them on himself, and to have written the first Pen Sao, or native herbal, recording 365 drugs. Around 600 BC, the Greeks integrated science into mythological thinking. They began thinking logically about diseases rather than believing spiritual explanations. Hippocrates was a philosopher, physician and pharmacist. Things began to change when Greek philosophers and doctors made the critical breakthrough in realizing that diseases have natural, rather than spiritual, causes. He also wrote Oath of Hippocrates. Theophrastus experimented with many types of plants as medications. His observations and writings dealing with the medical qualities and peculiarities of herbs are unusually accurate, even in the light of present knowledge. Mithridates VI studied the adverse effects of plants. He made not only the art of poisoning, but also the art of preventing and counteracting that substance, subjects of intensive study. Pedanius Dioscorides contributed mightily to such a transition in pharmacy. He recorded what he observed, promulgated excellent rules for collection of drugs, their storage and use. Cosmas and Damian were the twin brothers of Arabian descent, and devout Christians, who represent the closeness of medicine and pharmacy by practice medicine or surgery without a fee. They reputedly cured blindness, fever, paralysis and reportedly expelled the breast serpent. There are 3 major advances in pharmacy occurred at this time. The first one is formularies. It was the continuation of documentation attributed to knowledge of specific drug information to be used by pharmacists. The Arabs separated the arts of apothecary and physician, establishing in Baghdad as the first privately owned drug stores. They preserved much of the Greco-Roman wisdom, added to it, developing with the aid of their natural resources syrups, confections, conserves, distilled waters and alcoholic liquids. Among the brilliant contributors to the sciences of pharmacy and medicine, during the Arabian era was one genius who seems to stand for his time, the Persian, Ibn Sina. He was a pharmacist, poet, physician, philosopher, diplomat, an intellectual giant, a favorite of Persian princes and rulers. His pharmaceutical teachings were accepted as authority in the West until the 17th century, and still are dominant influences in the Orient. In European countries exposed to Arabian influence, public pharmacies began to appear in the 17th century. However, it was not until about 1240 AD that, in Sicily and southern Italy, pharmacy was separated from medicine. King Frederick II of Hohenstaufen, at his palace in Palermo, he presented subject pharmacists with the first European edict completely separating their responsibilities from those of medicine, and prescribing regulations for their professional practice. Trade in drugs and spices was lucrative in the Middle Ages. In the British Isles, it was monopolized by the Guild of Grocers, which had jurisdiction over the apothecaries. Upon persuasion by the philosopher-politician, Francis Bacon, the king granted a charter in 1617 which formed a separate company known as the Master, Wardens and Society of the Art and Mystery of the Apothecaries of the City of London, over vigorous protests of the grocers. This was the first organization of pharmacists in the Anglo-Saxon world.
In the days of the empiric era, pharmacopoeias were used to protect public health. One of the apothecaries who played the major role during the times of empiric era was young Parisian apothecary, Louis Hebert. He helped de Monts and Champlain build New France's first settlement, the Habitation, at Port Royal, Nova Scotia, Canada. Hebert looked after the health of the pioneers, cultivated native drug plants, and supervised the gardens. When the Habitation was destroyed by the English in 1613, he returned to his Parisian apothecary shop. The lure of Canada was strong, however, and in 1617, he and the family returned with Champlain to Quebec, where Hebert's green thumb gained him lasting fame as the first successful farmer in what is now Canada. Christopher Marshall, an Irish immigrant, established his apothecary shop in Philadelphia in 1729. During 96 years, this pioneer pharmaceutical enterprise became a leading retail store, nucleus of large-scale chemical manufacturing, a practical training school for pharmacists, an important supply depot during the Revolution, and finally, it was managed by granddaughter Elizabeth, America's first woman pharmacist. Colonial America's first hospital, Pennsylvania, was established in Philadelphia in 1751. The first hospital pharmacy began operations there in 1752. The ingenuity of Benjamin Franklin was helpful in both. First hospital pharmacist was Jonathan Roberts, but it was his successor, John Morgan, whose practice as a hospital pharmacist between 1755 to 1756. First as pharmacist, later as physician, he advocated prescription writing and championed independent practice of two professions. Carl Wilhelm Scheele gave to the world discoveries that have brought its people incalculable advantages. Encouraged by enlightened preceptors, all of his discoveries were made in the Swedish pharmacists in which he worked, as apprentice, as clerk, and finally as owner, in Köping. Swedish pharmacist Scheele paved the way for isolating organic plant acids. But it remained for a young German apothecary, Friedrich Wilhelm Adams Zertunner, to give the world opium's chief narcotic principle, morphine, and to recognize and prove the importance of a new class of organic substances, alkaloids. He is best known for his discovery of morphine in 1804. Taking their cue from Zertunner's alkaloidal experiments, two French pharmacists, Messrs. Pierre-Joseph Pelletier and Joseph Binet-Macavin II, isolated emetin from ipecacuanha in 1817, strychnine and brucine from new vomica in 1818. Then, in their laboratory in the back of a Parisian apothecary shop, they tackled the problem that had baffled scientists for decades, by wresting the secrets of the Peruvian barks that were so useful against malaria. Faced with two major threats, deterioration of the practice of pharmacy, and a discriminatory classification by the University of Pennsylvania Medical Faculty, the pharmacists of Philadelphia held a tempestuous protest meeting in Carpenter's Hall, February 23, 1821. 68 pharmacists signed the constitution of the first pharmaceutical association in the United States. American Pharmacy's first educational institution, bearing the same name, opened November 9. first U.S. industry in medicinal herbs, was carried on by the United Society of Believers in Christ's second appearing, commonly known as the Shakers. Begun about 1820, and commercially important by 1830, the medicinal herb industry grew, hit its peak in the 1860s, then waned at the close of the century. The Shaker label was recognized for reliability and quality for more than a century. William Proctor, Jr., graduated from the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy in 1837, operated a retail pharmacy and served the college as professor of pharmacy for 20 years. He was a leader in founding the American Pharmaceutical Association and served that organization as its first secretary. Later, as its president, served 30 years on the Use Provision Committee, and he was for 22 years editor of the American Journal of Pharmacy. When Dr. Albert B. Prescott launched the pharmacy course at the University of Michigan in 1868, critical attention was aroused because he abandoned the traditional requirement of pre-graduation apprenticeship. During the next 30 years, Dr. Prescott had the satisfaction of seeing his once revolutionary innovations generally adopted by pharmaceutical faculties.
In industrialization era, the development of manufacturing pharmacy began and rapid mass production of medicines followed. Standardization, biologically prepared products, complex chemical synthesis, and increased use of parenteral medications were all part of this period.
More people needed drugs for injuries and illnesses from the wars, so mass production of medications were made through industrial machines. Scientific research was also growing in the industrial era. Despite the professional skill and integrity of 19th-century pharmacists, seldom did two preparations of vegetable drugs have the same strength, even though prepared by identical processes. Plant drugs varied widely in active alkaloidal and glucosidal content.
The first answer to this problem came when Parke, Davis and Company introduced standardized liquor Agrittae purificatus in 1879. Dr. Albert Brown Lyons, as the firm's chief chemist, further developed methods of alkaloidal assay, masters. When, in 1894, Behring and Rowe announced the effectiveness of diphtheria antitoxin, pharmaceutical scientists both in Europe and in the United States rushed to put the new discovery into production. Parke, Davis and Company was among the pioneers. The serum became available in 1895, and lives of thousands of children were saved.
Research in some form has gone hand in hand with the development of pharmacy through the ages. However, it was the chemical synthesis of antipyrin in 1883 that gave impetus and inspiration for intensive search for therapeutically useful compounds. Begun by the Germans, who dominate the field into World War I, the lead in pharmaceutical research passed thereafter to the United States.
Pharmaceutical manufacturing as an industry apart from retail pharmacy had its beginnings about 1600. Really got underway in the middle 1700s. It developed first in Germany, then in England and in France. In America, it was the child of wars which, born in the Revolution, grew rapidly during and following the Civil War.
Antibiotics are not new, and their actions probably were first observed by Pasteur in 1877. However, the second quarter of the 20th century marked the flowering of the antibiotic era, a new and dramatic departure in the production of disease-fighting drugs. Alexander Fleming's discovery of penicillin in 1929 went undeveloped, and Florian Chain studied it in 1940. Under pressure of World War II, the pharmaceutical manufacturers rapidly adapted mass production methods to penicillin. In 1988, C.D. Hepler established the concept of pharmaceutical care, which is also known as patient care era. The beginning of this era concentrated on research to develop new medicines. Had a lot of adverse reactions to drugs, so drug review and monitoring resulted. Pharmacists began to take a more hands-on role in dispensing medications and patient education.
The biggest innovations at the 21st century will be at the intersection of biology and technology. Here's The new era is beginning, which is biotechnology. Research in the area of biotechnology and gene therapy is being conducted. Medications are being produced through recombinant nanotechnology. Some diseases are linked to genetic defects. New therapies for cancer, anemia, and hepatitis are being introduced.
In common parlance, by a pharmacist, we mean a professional who works in chemist shops, dispensaries, and medical stores.
But, apart from medical domain, there are several fields where a pharmacist can get the job opportunities.
The pharmacist in the hospital works closely with the doctors to decide on the most cost-effective medicine for different disease conditions. Pharmacists check on the dose and type of medicine prescribed by the doctors, providing an essential screen against medication errors. They fill prescriptions and counsel patients on the right way to take medicine, to improve patient compliance, so as to ensure therapeutic success and to reduce adverse effects due to inappropriate use of the drug.
A community or retail pharmacist usually works in a pharmacy store. The retail pharmacists are responsible for dispensing controlled medication according to legal and ethical guidelines. This is to ensure the general public receive the right medication as well as a safe dosage. Sometimes they are liaising with doctors about prescriptions and recommending the most suitable medications for minor illnesses.
Industrial pharmacists conduct research experiments to design, develop and test new drugs and treatments. They are more likely work in pharmaceutical companies that manufacture drugs, with the majority of their time being spent in labs doing research and development. In addition to ensuring that the drugs are safe and effective, they also need to make sure that the new medications developed can be mass-produced and are in compliance with government and industry regulations.
A pharmaceutical sales executive, also referred to as pharmaceutical or medical sales representatives. They promote a pharmaceutical company's products and services to clients in the healthcare industry. For this job, an understanding of pharmacology is useful, as they'll be describing certain medications' chemistry, method of action, side effects and potential interactions with other drugs. The best and most efficient pharmacy is within our system.
Do you know that? What is the most concerning recent issue of the pharmaceutical today?
Let's see some of them, in more details.
There are 2 countries are in charge of supplying the US with generic drugs. Restrictions for importing and exporting raw materials and containers for medicine hinders the development of pharma manufacturing, and of course disturbs the business of pharmaceutical companies that have been bearing losses. Moreover, it also refers to the production of medical equipment in China. Their plants are either shut down or work far from their full capacity, and they simply can't deliver their products to their customers worldwide because of the pandemic. These crisis issues are expected to bring a great increase in prices for drugs and medical devices in the nearest future.
NHS England Chief Executive Sir Simon Stevens said that less than a year after the first case of this new disease was diagnosed, the NHS has now delivered the first clinically approved COVID-19 vaccination. That is a remarkable achievement. Margaret Keenan, who turns 91 next week, becoming the first in the world to receive the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19. The UK's Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency granted emergency use authorization for the vaccine early December. On the back of a rolling submission including data from a Phase 3 clinical study, which showed an efficacy rate of 95% in people without prior SARS-CoV-2 infection and also in those with and without prior infection. In the trial, BNT162b2 was generally well tolerated with no serious safety concerns, reported by the Data Monitoring Committee to date. Here finally we come to the end.
We hope all of you now get to acknowledge by history of pharmacy, careers in pharmacy, and also the latest current issues or news related to pharmaceutical.
Thank you for your patience.
And time to watch this video.
Goodbye. Stay safe and healthy.